Hegemony of the native speaker. So the word hegemony refers to a well-established ideology that almost everyone adheres to, that almost everyone believes in that ideology. And ideologies are not always hegemonies, because ideologies can be different and people can acknowledge that people have different ideologies, because some people may have some beliefs of separate beliefs of religion. Other people can say, yes, you may have your religion. Some people may be a capitalist, a socialist, but there are arguments for each part, right? But what happens in a hegemony is that the dominant ideology is protected and by other and controlled, and it is so dominant that any other ideology that is there, people don't actually believe that. Alright, so hegemony of the native speaker, this refers to the fact that previously and even maybe even now, they believe that the native speaker is the goal or is the best user of that language. We all may unconsciously believe that, or we may still believe that the best English speaker is someone who had English as their mother tongue, right? For example, I sometimes stutter a lot and I cannot speak fluently in English, but does that mean that the native speaker is better than me at every way? Does that mean that every native speaker of English can write or read as well as I do or you do, or as well as any non-native speaker can do? No. So let's start. World Englishes call for replacing the essentialist orthodoxies. Essentialist, so like those which are foundational, which were like so important that they identified like they are the very foundational blocks. And orthodoxies means the traditional beliefs, the sacred cows, like those things which can never be sacrificed, like the sacred cows of SLA and the English teaching profession, with a pragmatic, socially realistic approach reflecting the realities of how and why English is used around the world. So World English has said that this should be changed, like we shouldn't just view the native speaker as the ideal English speaker. The most important of these sacred cows, the most important of these hegemonies, you can say, was the notion of the native speaker standard as the target of acquisition and teaching. Just like I said, like the goal should not always be the native speaker, because in some ways the non-native standard, the non-native speaker may have a higher standard than the native speaker, and in many cases there may even be better teachers. Non-native teachers may even be better because they know actually how the experience of learning that language, and if the non-native teacher shares the language, his or her first tongue, with the students, then there can be more, the students can relate to him or her more, and more teaching strategies can be used which are more effective. So in the past, this dogma, this belief was adopted uncritically in SLA studies. Like this was taken for granted. That's why it was the hegemony. Like people everywhere thought, like most people thought that it's taken for granted. We take for granted that the native speaker is the ideal, and reinforced by the dominance of the Chomskyan notion of competence. So Chomsky is a very eminent linguist, so he came up with the concept of competence and performance, and competence that related with variation, performance, communication, and bilingualism. In that notion of competence, it was the ideal competence, or the ideal goal, the ideal proficiency was held up to be the native speaker. So anyone below that are not masters of their English language, of their language, and normally those are the non-native speakers or the non-native writers or non-native users of that language. So there's the term called non-native proficiency or non-native competence. So there's also the belief that non-native people can never reach the very top of the native-like fluency, native-like competence as the natives. However, this native speaker model is unsuitable on many counts. On many counts mean on many areas, on many respects. Native speaker norms are a distraction where the primary interlocutors are non-native or non-standard speakers. As it was just mentioned in the previous section, that more English is spoken primarily by non-native speakers with other non-native speakers. Therefore, native speakers shouldn't be the norm, right? So that is one reason. Okay, the majority of English use globally involves interaction between one non-native speaker and another. Say, means for example, between a Korean car manufacturer and a Brazilian dealer. It is clarity and intelligibility. Clarity means being clear. Intelligibility means being able to be comprehended, right? Rather than an idealized authenticity, like we don't have to be perfect imitators of British and American English, of native English users. That is crucial for intercultural communication. Alright, I'll touch on that later because I think that this is expanded. It is pragmatically unsuitable. Pragmatically means contextually unsuitable, where the reference group for reasons of cultural authenticity and identity is a non-native indigenous elite rather than a distant abstract international model. So Sridhar and Sridhar are arguing for the centrality of non-native speaker being the hegemony. Like non-native speaker should be the idealized speaker because one, there are more non-native speakers than native speakers, and two, intercultural communication means when people from different culture communicate with each other. For example, a Korean car manufacturer and a Brazilian dealer. So these kinds of English communications happen more than native to native communications. So it is impractical to actually teach them a language of only one culture. The ideal thing is rather to strive for intercultural competence. Like if you can speak to a Bangladeshi English user, if you can speak to an Australian English user, if you can speak to an African English user, then you are actually the ideal English speaker. If you can speak with different people of different cultures, then you are the best, you are one of the best English users. Not if you can simply imitate British and American English users. For example, do you think that British and American language users can understand Bangladeshi English better than us? No, I don't think so, right? We are better at understanding the people of our own country even when they use English rather than the English themselves. So this is what is pointed out here, that the idea of the hegemony of the native speaker is faulty in these two respects. The contributors to this issue means Sridhar and Sridhar, the researchers, or maybe the other scholars as well, I'm not sure about this one, agree that the native speaker is no longer considered to be the only acceptable target of SLA. A proficient non-native speaker can be a perfectly effective user of English in today's world. Let's highlight this. The native speaker from here to here. This is a remarkable turnabout in SLA and English language teaching that has come about in the last 3 to 4 decades, primarily due to the energetic advocacy of the World English's paradigm. So this was the result of World English's scholars, and now SLA researchers also agree with this. However, the native speaker hegemony continues to exert a siren call, so it's not yet extinguished. There are still many people who believe that the native speaker is the ideal English speaker. As Ortega correctly observes, many people live their non-nativeness as an oppressive reality that they must constantly manage and negotiate under the hegemony of monolingual ideologies. So, many people, even us Bangladeshi people, even maybe I used to think some years ago that I needed to take away my Bangladeshi accent or Bangladeshi other interference errors that happened due to my first language. I thought that I should practice English more so that I become better at writing it, at reading it, at speaking it. Even this channel is built because I want to become more fluent in English, but the reason is not to throw away my Bangaliness, right? I still do use some Bangla pronunciations, right? For example, I said territory sometimes instead of territory, right? I know the English pronunciation, the quote-unquote standard pronunciation, and there are also others, small matters. So anyway, others, for example, Larsen Freeman, Kumarada Velu, Kangaraja, Kubota, have expressed similar views in different contexts. So let's summarize here, right? Hegemony of the native speaker. I think we can just highlight this and add a comment here. Now, the native English speaker is no longer considered to be the ideal English speaker. Rather, people who can communicate interculturally are better English users. The word Englishes, the field of word Englishes brought about this change of hegemony to in the field of SLA. Alright. The Formalist Ontology. So, as I briefly said before, the Formalist Ontology refers to thinking of language and prioritizing the languages or any language's structural elements more than the communicative or the meaningful or the purposive elements. So let's read. Lourdes Ortega insightfully points out that many of the limitations of SLA theories that we criticized in our 1986 paper can be traced to SLA's ontological inheritance from Chomskyan linguistics. Alright, so Chomsky from his structuralist point of view, so the SLA's point of view of formalism, of a formalist ontology, of that structure. Language is very structured and we should dissect language, we should analyze language structurally. This ideology came from Chomskyan linguistics, and it was itself, Chomsky was also inspired by Saussure. So Saussure was another eminent linguist who actually started structuralism, made it established it. Itself a continuation of Saussurean structuralist linguistics. This involves a valorization of form and autonomy of structure. So I don't know what valorization means. Let's search for it, right? Valorization. It means to enhance or try to enhance the price. Alright, so just to enhancement. For enhancement. This involves an enhancement of form and autonomy of structure. Autonomy means full independence, right? Structure is all that counts, not meaning. So that was the belief of structuralist linguistics. A belief that meaning inheres in the code. Like code means language and there is inherent meaning there in the code. But obviously, like different languages have different meanings, right? For example, a tree is a gach in Bangla, and it is another thing in another language. For example, I think it is albero in Spanish. But can you just think of the word albero or gach or English, and can you actually say that people who don't know the Bangla meaning, who don't know Bangla, can actually think of a tree when they hear gach? No. And people who don't know Spanish, if they hear albero, do you think that they will understand that it's a tree? No, right? So the meaning is not inherently there in the structure, in the pronunciation, in the spelling, right? So that's the reason why, and there are many other reasons. So that's the reason why Saussurean structuralist linguistics is, there is a part of structure there, but it is not enough. So that's why World Englishes rejected this. Okay, which resulted in the strategic decision to remove language from context of use. So if you consider that structure is everything, then you do not actually need context. You need to know who said this, in what context, to whom, because structure is everything as far as structuralists go. And rejection of any reference to the context or communicator communicative function, or myopic formalism. Myopic means, I think, short-sighted, like they're not actually seeing things through. Formalism in her apt characterization. So some scholar called it myopic formalism, like they are just thinking of the structures, and it is a very short-sighted point of view. The formalist focus led to conceptualizing language. Conceptualizing means to think of language as a cognitive object, something that can be analyzed by our brain, and a focus on language acquisition as the study of the unfolding of an innate body of formal properties through putatively universal cognitive stages and strategies. Let me Google this. Wait. Alright. So it's something that is assumed to exist or have existed, or commonly accepted or supposed, like, but uncritically, right? It's not critically been done. Let me read the sentence again. The formalist focus led to conceptualizing language as a cognitive object and a focus on language acquisition. So they thought of language and they focused on language acquisition as the study of the unfolding of an innate body of formal properties through seemingly, we can say instead of putatively, seemingly, without evidence, seemingly thought to be the case, but without evidence. Universal cognitive stages and strategies underplaying cross-linguistic variation. Alright, let me make some notes about this. So here, formalists, they thought that, let me write, language is something inherent which develops in children, learners, children or adult learners naturally, right? It's as if one is studying languages, then automatically they will learn the languages, and as if language is something sentient, right? So if you know what that means, sentient means it has a specific, like it has a soul and it will develop out of its own. It does not need practice or interaction with other people or teaching, so things like that. So there was a very popular theory by Chomsky, like we talked about him. It was Formalist Ontology was also influenced by Chomskyan linguistics. So Chomsky thought that people pick up their mother tongue on their own, right? So there are some it's very popular, and even I believe it to some extent, that children are made with an inherent ability to pick up language, but it does not explain language acquisition completely, and at least for adults it doesn't happen, right? So adults cannot just pick up language very easily. So Ortega correctly notes that this essentialist ontology, like its essence, ontology has cost SLA dearly. Means that SLA was negatively impacted by this theory, by this point of view, leading to the neglect of a huge proportion of second language learners, or to the misrepresentation of their status. It will be off. Alright, there is a lot to unpack here. The very notion of linguistic competence and its relation to performance, the relation between language and communication, grammar and sociolinguistics and pragmatics, and the shaky partition between linguistics and applied linguistics, which is more of a difference of focus than substance. So the main thing here that the writers are trying to say is that structure is not the most important part of a language. For example, we can say the same thing and mean different things. Let me give an example. If I say, can you pass me the salt please? So structurally it's a request, right? The speech act is one of request. However, it's actually and if you respond by saying yes I can, but if you don't proceed to actually pass me the salt, So here the structure isn't important. The important thing is the function of my request. By doing the request, by indirectly saying that I want the salt, I am asking you, I am actually requesting you to give me the salt. Or a more indirect example, and a more direct example I should say, is that if I say I'm feeling very hot, so what does that mean? This is a statement, right? But if I am saying this and you're hearing this, it means an indirect request for you to turn on the fan, or to you to turn on the AC, or you to decrease the temperature, right? So things are language is pretty much and is very much, at least more important in its functional respects than its structural respects, right? Issues skirted, avoided, or finessed for over a century have come home to roost. So it's a very fancy statement, but what it really means is that we have, like, SLA researchers have not talked about these issues before, like talked about the relationship between structure and meaning that much critically before. However, the World English's paradigm has talked about it, though has never subscribed to the axiom, which means to the moral of autonomy of structure. It did not consider that structuralist philosophy is the best philosophy. Starting with Cutru's earliest work in the 1960s, World English has rejected the dichotomy between form and function. Dichotomy means it's a oppositional force, oppositional concept, like one against the other, black and white. However, there are also shades of gray, right? Shades of white, shades of black. There are other colors. It's a total spectrum of color. It's not just that either the form or the function, like the structure or the meaning, we shouldn't think of that, but we should think that both of these matter, right? If someone is able to converse in a language but does not know the grammar, we shouldn't say that he or she is a master of that language, right? Grammatical knowledge is important, especially when it comes to academics. So grammar is important, and also function is also important, if not more important. And the division between linguistics and social linguistics. Social linguistics is about the linguistics, the way different people of different societies use language, and it depends on context, right? It's totally different from formalist ontology. World English has treated context of situation as integral to linguistic description. The same thing, it has invoked context fruitfully in explaining many aspects of non-native varieties, from the lexical innovations and bilingual creativity to attitudes and standards. Now, World English has started to make people realize that other cultural English users, they also have a rich way of using the language. They are very creative, and now they are shifting the attitudes of the non-native speakers to be a more positive one. World English thus helped change the ontology of SLA. It changed the very idea of how we think about SLA, of not structure but of functions, of the functional element of language, as witnessed in the orientations. This refers to on the stances, like what is your orientation, which idea do you stand for, adopted by the contributors to this issue. So the 2018 World English's issue, all the other scholars also subscribe to this philosophy, also think about it like Sridhar and Sridhar do, all of which involve a rejection of the formalist ontology as essentialist and embrace of many aspects of the non-essentialist ontology integral to World English. So World English does not think that one thing is better than the other. Form is not better than function, but also function is also not the best by itself. It also needs form, so both are required. It is heartening to see that most practitioners of SLA, except for some diehards, have abandoned the formalism in favor of some form of functionalism. So Sridhar and Sridhar are happy that most people have shifted their ideology. Context, use, function, identity, communication strategy, and other concepts once relegated to semantics Sociolinguistics and pragmatics are claiming a principal place in the recent iterations of SLE theory. Iterations means versions, and before World Englishes changed people's perspective. Before that, people only used to talk about context in these fields: semantics, which is about meaning, study of meaning; sociolinguistics, study of different societies, of how they use language; and pragmatics, which is of how people use language depending on the context. So context or functions, the functional aspect of language was only relegated to these three fields in the past, but now context is even more important than structure.